In the midnight rain, Karen, drenched to the bone, threw herself into my arms, clutching the hem of my coat with a death grip. Young master, I've stolen the conglomerate's core encryption key. I want to stay by your side. I wiped the blood from the corner of her lip and sneered. I'm going to make them crawl on their knees to beg you to return it. Welcome to Apex System, an exciting story is about to begin. Bang! The Wangwali cane struck the marble floor heavily, producing a dull, thunderous thud. I snapped my eyes open. The blinding glare of the Swarovski crystal chandelier forced me to squint. The familiar top-tier mahogany long table, the scent of premium cigars lingering in the air, and the man sitting at the head of the table, that majestic, cold-eyed old man, was my grandfather, Ryunosuke Jinguji. I glanced down at the Patek Philippe on my wrist. The date displayed confirmed an unbelievable reality. I had been reborn. I had returned to 3 years ago, to the very family board meeting that decided my fate. Hamura, the family has seen all the effort you've put in over the past 5 years. My grandfather's deep, raspy voice echoed through the cavernous boardroom, carrying the unquestionable authority of a patriarch. However, the Jinguji Zaibatsu is not your one-man show. For the sake of family balance and long-term development, starting today, the Tech Interactive Entertainment Group and Global Capital under your name will be split and divested. Your 6 brothers will each take over your core business operations. The moment he finished speaking, the 6 men sitting across from me exchanged knowing glances. The eldest brother, Mikoto Jinguji, curled his lip in a smirk he couldn't quite hide, while the third brother, Tsukasa Jinguji, twirled his Mont Blanc pen with feigned nonchalance, his eyes gleaming with pure greed. These were my 6 useless brothers. For the past 5 years, I had slept only 4 hours a day, fighting bloody battles in the sea of commerce to single-handedly transform a near-bankrupt family shell into a global business empire with a market value exceeding 100 billion. And them? Aside from street racing, keeping starlets, and bragging at cocktail parties, they were good for nothing. In my previous life, the moment I heard this decision, I lost control completely. I flipped the table in a rage, demanding with bloodshot eyes to know why my grandfather was being so unjust. And what did that get me? A medical diagnosis of emotional instability and mental impairment, the forced forfeiture of all my shares, my legs broken before being kicked out of the house, and finally, on a snowy winter night, being crushed into a pulp in a car accident, they orchestrated. Hamura, this is the final decision. Sign the equity transfer agreement. My grandfather pushed a thick stack of documents toward me, his tone as cold as if he were granting a charity. Everyone held their breath. Mikoto and Tsukasa had even slightly arched their backs, waiting to see me bark like a rabid dog. But I didn't. I stood up slowly. Instead of showing a hint of anger, a relieved smile curled at the corners of my mouth. I agree. These 3 words fell lightly in the conference room, yet they landed like a heavy sledgehammer, catching everyone off guard. The sneer on Zun's face froze instantly, and the fountain pen in C's hand dropped onto the table with a sharp clack. Even grandfather, who usually kept his emotions hidden, saw his deep, aged eyes contract sharply. You! What did you say? Zun stared at me in disbelief, as if he had seen a ghost. I ignored him. Instead, I unpinned the solid gold family crest from my chest, the symbol of supreme power, and tossed it carelessly onto the table. Then, I picked up the signing pen and flipped open the dozens of pages of the equity transfer agreement, signing without a moment's hesitation, without even glancing at the terms. Asterisk scratch, scratch, scratch. Asterisk. In less than half a minute, I signed the name, Hamura Jinguji, in every spot that required a signature. The seal is in my safe. The code is 6 zeros. I'll have my secretary hand over the highest clearance security card right now. I pushed the signed documents back toward my grandfather, my movements fluid and decisive, without the slightest hint of hesitation. 100 billion yen conglomerate, an empire I built with my own 2 hands. Just like that, I tossed it away as if I were throwing out trash. The meeting room was deathly silent. The 6 brothers, who had originally been prepared to watch the drama unfold, were now staring at me as if I were a madman. They had no idea that taking over a behemoth with an incredibly complex structure, one held together solely by my personal influence, was not a gift for a bunch of incompetents like them, but a death warrant. Yen, what kind of trick are you playing? My grandfather stared intently at me, his withered hands gripping his cane tightly. No tricks, grandfather. I adjusted the cuffs of my bespoke suit and turned toward the heavy, carved wooden doors of the meeting room. When I reached the doorway, I paused and turned my head slightly, sweeping a gaze full of pity over my 6 self-satisfied brothers. Enjoy your new toys. I let out a soft chuckle, pushed open the heavy doors, and stepped into the light and shadows of the corridor without looking back. Just as the doors slowly closed behind me, a cold, mechanical voice suddenly rang out deep within my mind. Ding! Detected that the host has completed the Chable Outcast achievement. The threads of fate have undergone an epic shift. Windfall Overload System is undergoing deep binding. Binding progress, 100%. The cold, mechanical voice echoed in my mind, causing my footsteps to falter slightly. As I pushed through the revolving glass doors on the first floor of the Jinguji building, I came face to face with the head of security. The awe that used to reside on his face had long since vanished, replaced by a businesslike indifference. Young Master Hamura, the President's office has just issued an emergency notice. According to regulations, you are required to hand over the keys to the Rolls-Royce and your building access card. Additionally, all your family-affiliated credit cards were fully frozen 3 minutes ago. Word travels fast. Those 6 pieces of trash were clearly impatient to erase every trace of my existence. Take them. I casually tossed the car keys and magnetic card into his arms, not sparing a single word of nonsense as I walked straight out into the bustling streets of Tokyo. The cold wind of early autumn blew against my face, bringing a hint of chill. At this moment, I had truly left with nothing to my name. No luxury cars to pick me up, no bodyguards following me, and not even enough spare change to buy a cup of coffee. Yet I felt a sense of freedom like never before. System settlement complete. The host proactively abandoned a business empire with a market value of 100 billion yen. Boldness rating, SSS level. Ultimate Novice Mega Gift Pack has been distributed. Reward 1, 1 absolute anonymity Swiss bearer account, with an initial heaven-defying startup fund, 10 billion yen. The source of funds has been thoroughly laundered through offshore networks and is absolutely legal and compliant. Reward 2, system-exclusive passive skill. Financial Report Analytical Eye. Capable of accurately seeing through the short-term capital flows and core vulnerabilities of any listed company. The moment the system broadcast ended, the private phone in my pocket vibrated. This was an unregistered personal phone known only to me. Even my family was unaware of its existence. I unlocked the screen, and an anonymous encrypted text message from UBS caught my eye. Your account has been successfully credited with 10 billion yen. Current available balance, 10 billion yen. 10 billion. Looking at these massive figures, the smile on my face grew even more intense. In my previous life, to earn the first 10 billion for the family, I slaved away for 3 full months, eventually being rushed to the emergency room with a perforated stomach from excessive drinking. Now, simply because I abandoned that decaying cage, this massive fortune has fallen effortlessly into my pocket. The members of the Jinguji family thought that by stripping away my power and assets, they could grind me into the mud. They have no idea that my ability to build a $100 billion conglomerate was never dependent on the Jinguji name, but on my own mind. I turned around and looked up at the Jinguji building, which pierced the clouds. The glass curtain wall reflected a cold light under the sun. Enjoy your final revelry while you can. With this 10 billion yen in capital, combined with the god-tier abilities bestowed by the system, I will make those pieces of trash watch with their own eyes as the power and wealth they so desperately crave turn to ashes within my grasp. After leaving the Jinguji building, I headed straight to a secret safe house located in Minato Ward. This was a detached villa I had purchased under a pseudonym years ago. No one knew about it but me. As night fell, a rare torrential rain began to pour over Tokyo. The gale-force winds drove raindrops to lash frantically against the floor-to-ceiling windows. I sat on the leather sofa, using a tablet to map out the deployment of that 10 billion yen in seed funding. Suddenly, the surveillance monitor for the villa's main gate lit up. In the torrential rain, a slender figure was leaning heavily against the iron gate. Frowning slightly, I immediately stood up, pressed the release button, and hurried to the foyer to push open the heavy oak door. As a streak of pale lightning tore through the night sky, I saw clearly who it was. It was actually Koton Karen. Within the entire Jinguji conglomerate, she was known as the infamous Ice Queen, Secretary, and in my past life, she was my most loyal right-hand woman. Possessing a near-terrifying instinct for business intelligence, she was hailed by the industry as a walking S-class business intelligence system. Usually, she was always dressed in a meticulous, high-end professional suit, her gaze cold and indifferent, never deigning to acknowledge anyone. But at this moment, she was in a state of utter wretchedness. In the midnight rain, Karen lunged into my arms, soaked to the bone, clutching the hem of my coat with a death grip. Her long hair, once elegantly styled, now clung in a disheveled mess to her pale cheeks, and a startling smear of blood marked the corner of her mouth. "Young master!" Her voice trembled against the howling wind, yet it carried a tone of unreserved resolve. She pressed a black, military-grade encrypted flash drive into my hand. I've stolen the conglomerate's core keys. I'm staying by your side. Looking at the bruises on her wrists where she had been roughly grabbed, I understood everything instantly. After Jinguji Takaru took over the CEO's office, he must have tried to coerce her with both threats and bribes, even resorting to violence, to force her to hand over the hidden resources I had left behind. But they had underestimated the backbone of this iceberg, saw Shuria. I took a deep breath and reached out to gently wipe the blood from the corner of her lip. Where my fingers touched, she was ice cold. Was it worth it? I asked, staring into her eyes. To completely betray the Jinguji family for me, even at the risk of their retaliation? Karen looked up, and those eyes that were usually as cold as frost were now filled with fanaticism and loyalty. A Jinguji family without you is nothing but a tomb ready to collapse at any moment. My loyalty belongs to you alone. I gave a cold laugh, took off my cashmere coat, and wrapped it tightly around her trembling body. Looking out at the dark night where the gale raged, I spoke in a chilling tone. Don't worry. Soon I will make them beg on their knees for you to return. After settling Karen in the guest room for a hot shower, I returned to the study alone and inserted the black USB drive into my computer. The moment the screen lit up, the top secret intelligence Karen had risked her life to retrieve poured out like a waterfall. Combined with the financial statement analysis granted to me by the system, the originally dull data before me was instantly dismantled into glowing veins of information. To cover the deficits of his overseas industries, Mikoto Jinguji had just illegally embezzled 10 billion in public funds. Meanwhile, the third brother, Tsukasa Jinguji, in his bid to seize control of a new project, had privately signed an extremely harsh gambling agreement, with a leverage ratio so high it was on the verge of liquidation at any moment. Those 6 fools thought that by driving me away, they could sit securely on their thrones and feast upon my flesh. But they have no idea that this core intelligence Karen risked her life to bring out is the very fuse that will set their thrones ablaze. Staring at the precarious financial loopholes on the screen, I leaned back slowly into my chair, a trace of bloodthirsty excitement flashing in my eyes. The counterattack layout begins now. Early the next morning, the torrential rain ceased, and the early autumn sunlight pierced through the floor-to-ceiling windows, spilling onto the study carpet. While Yen was wearing one of my oversized white shirts, the only clean replacement clothing currently available in the villa, yet her swift and decisive professional aura hadn't diminished in the slightest. She gently placed a cup of freshly brewed black coffee by my right hand, then skillfully powered up the backup workstation. Young master, the Tokyo Stock Exchange opens in 10 minutes, Karen reported, her eyes having already regained their usual composure and sharpness. I nodded slightly, my gaze locked onto a stock on the screen named Far East Smart Manufacturing. This was one of the core industries my third brother, Tsukasa Jinguji, had just taken over from me, and the very chip he had used to sign that high-leverage gambling agreement in his haste to prove himself. Deep in my mind, the cold system notification sounded right on schedule. System skill. Financial statement analysis activated. High-level prediction in progress. Target, Far East Intelligent Manufacturing. Capital chain health, extremely dangerous. High-level prediction result. At 10:15 a.m. today, the hidden debt black hole will be triggered. Lead capital will flee in a stampede, and the stock price will face a precipitous collapse. I looked at the flickering deep blue data panel on my retina, a cold curve forming at the corners of my mouth. Last night, I didn't just use the top-secret USB drive Karen brought to dismantle the data. I also packaged the ironclad evidence of Tsukasa's private transfer of core assets and set it to be sent to several international financial media outlets that have been dogging the Jinguji Zaibatsu. Karen mobilized the 10 billion in principal from the Swiss account. I took a light sip of black coffee, my tone as calm as if I were discussing today's weather. Split it all into hidden offshore accounts, apply 10 times leverage, and go full short on Far East Intelligent Manufacturing. Karen's fingers struck the keys without a millisecond of hesitation, and the study was instantly filled with the crisp, rhythmic clatter of typing, like a sudden downpour. She didn't ask a single question. In her mind, my business intuition was absolute truth. At exactly 9 o'clock in the morning, the stock market opened on time. Due to the false positive news deliberately leaked by Tsukasa Jinguji a few days prior, Far East Manufacturing opened against the market trend. The red K line surged upward, seemingly heralding a future of boundless glory under his leadership. Time ticked away, second by second. 10:14 a.m. Karen stared intently at the climbing stock price, her slender fingers hovering over the enter key, ready to respond to any sudden emergency at a moment's notice. Countdown 3, 2, 1, I whispered, leaning back against the leather headrest of my chair. 10:15. Boom! Almost at the exact same second, the headlines of every major financial media outlet across the web simultaneously pushed an explosive breaking news alert. Asterisk. Far East Intelligent Manufacturing suspected of international accounting fraud. The 10 billion yuan betting agreement revealed as a kickback scheme. Asterisk. The red line, which had been trending steadily upward, looked as if it had been struck by an invisible 10,000-ton sledgehammer, instantly transforming into a green waterfall and a vertical plunge. The circuit breaker was triggered. Trading halted. After the market reopened, the crash continued without the slightest resistance. The numbers on the screen dove at a suffocating speed. The retail investors and hot money who had been chasing the highs didn't even have a chance to place sell orders. They were pinned ruthlessly to the limit down price. Young Master, Far East Manufacturing stock price has plummeted by 40%. Young Master C's gambling agreement has triggered the mandatory liquidation line, and his core position has completely blown up. Hua Lian's cold voice carried a rare hint of excitement, and her eyes, usually calm and unruffled, were now shimmering with admiration. I watched the profits in the account skyrocketing. In just half an hour, through precise short selling with leverage, the initial 10 billion in capital had surged to 30 billion. Jinguji C is likely so desperate right now that he smashed every antique vase in the CEO's office. Not only will he lose control of the company, but he will also be saddled with unimaginably high liquidated damages. This is just a negligible bit of interest. I slowly closed the laptop, my gaze as deep as an abyss. The real show has only just begun. On the top floor of the Jinguji building, the CEO's office, once a symbol of absolute power and elite order, was now filled with suffocating anxiety and chaos. Get Daiwa Bank on the line! Why has our revolving credit line been suddenly frozen? Where is the legal department? Draft a PR statement immediately. We must suppress the negative news regarding Far East Manufacturing. In the corridor, executives scurried about like headless flies. At the eye of this storm, the heavy mahogany doors of the CEO's office were violently kicked open. The youngest brother, Tsukasa Jinguji, burst into the room like a cornered beast, his eyes bloodshot and his tie askew. He slammed his hands heavily onto the wide desk, the force sending an antique fountain pen rolling onto the floor. Brother! Far East Manufacturing is finished! The forced liquidation line has been breached. Between the penalties from the betting agreement and the leveraged losses, I need 50 billion yen in cash right now to plug the hole. Have the finance department approve the slip immediately. Tsukasa's voice was hoarse, carrying a faint, barely perceptible tremor. Sitting in the large leather swivel chair, Mikoto Jinguji's face turned ashen. He violently hurled a stack of financial reports at Tsukasa's face, the pages scattering across the floor like snowflakes. 50 billion? You have the nerve to ask me for 50 billion? In just half an hour, you've caused the family's core industrial sector to be suspended from trading, and tens of billions of yen in market value have evaporated. Do you have any idea how many eyes are watching us right now? Mikoto roared through gritted teeth, his usual image of a refined elder brother completely shattered. You can't blame this all on me. Someone intentionally leaked dirt to short my stock. Tsukasa roared back, refusing to back down. As long as you release the headquarters reserve funds to me, I can stabilize the market immediately. Headquarters has no idle funds left. Mikoto turned his head away coldly, attempting to conceal a flicker of panic deep in his eyes. No funds? Big brother, are you joking? Accompanied by a sarcastic sneer, the fifth brother, Renjinguji, walked in from outside. Toying with a sterling silver lighter, his gaze fixed on Mikoto like a venomous snake. Before we kicked out that cheap excuse for a brother, the group's accounts clearly had over 10 billion yen in liquid capital. How is it that the moment he left, the money vanished? Could it be that you secretly diverted it to fill the deficit in the overseas markets? As soon as these words were spoken, the entire CEO's office instantly fell into a deathly silence. C whipped his head around to look at Zun, his eyes filled with disbelief and the fury of betrayal. Lien, stop your slanderous accusations. Zun's eye twitched violently as he suddenly stood up. Whether it's slander or not, wouldn't we know just by having the finance department pull the transaction records? Lien snorted coldly. Since you're too busy looking after yourself, brother, I'll be taking over the development rights for the Nagashima New District. I have to look out for the thousands of employees under me. I can't just go down with you. You wouldn't dare. That is the group's strategic core. Zun completely lost his mind, pointing at Lien's nose and shouting. What is there to be afraid of? Now that that guy is gone, there's no one left to work like a dog and clean up our messes anymore. Everyone will just have to fend for themselves. Ren spat out these words coldly before turning to leave, clearly intending to forcibly mobilize resources. Watching his brothers fall apart, Mikoto Jinguji slumped powerlessly back into his chair. It was only at this moment that he realized with horror a fact they had deliberately ignored. The reason the Jinguji Zaibatsu had been able to command the business world over the past few years wasn't because the six of them, the so-called legitimate bloodline, were brilliant or heroic. It was because their older brother, the one they treated as a disposable pawn, had been using near-terrifying business acumen to barely maintain the group's riddled capital chain like a tightrope walker. Now, the tightrope walker had left. All the massive debts, terrible returns on investment, and insatiable power struggles that had been deliberately covered up came back to haunt them all at once. Meanwhile, inside the study of a villa in the Minato district, I leaned back comfortably on the sofa, watching the massive LCD screen on the wall. The screen was split into dozens of small tiles, broadcasting real-time internal network surveillance footage from various departments within the Jinguji group. This was the backdoor program Karen had left behind before her departure. Watching those brothers of mine, who once stood so high and mighty, now tearing each other apart and resorting to mutual sabotage just to scramble for a few scraps, I felt no inner turmoil. In fact, I found it somewhat comical. System notification detected that the core cohesion of the Jinguji Zaibatsu has dropped to freezing point. Phase 1 of brotherly collapse has been triggered. Young Master, Master Rin has just ordered the freezing of all public accounts for the Nagashima New District project team and has mortgaged the project to Mitsui Bank in an attempt to cash out and protect his private assets. Karen's slender fingers tapped rapidly across the keyboard as she sent an intercepted secret report to my tablet. Utterly foolish. I shook my head contemptuously. I had already secretly placed the land in the Long Island New District under a series of cross-collateralized mortgages. For him to touch it now is equivalent to detonating a massive financial landmine. Without your protection, they are like crabs stripped of their shells, fragile and utterly defenseless. Karen picked up the cooled coffee cup, preparing to replace it with hot tea, her eyes filled with undisguised mockery. I stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the bustling city of steel. This is just the appetizer. I stared at the reflection in the glass, my tone calm yet cruel. I want them to bleed every last drop in this internal strife, until they realize who the true ruler of this empire is. Inside the secret data center in the basement, a massive holographic projection screen flickered with an eerie blue light. Less than 48 hours had passed since the power struggle scandal within the Jinguji group had erupted. Just moments ago, the cold, mechanical voice of the system, devoid of emotion yet intensely oppressive, echoed deep within my mind. System warning, core cohesion of the Jinguji Zaibatsu has been detected to have completely collapsed. Judgment criteria met. Due to the host having suffered unreasonable expulsion and malicious erasure by the family, the system officially descends the ultimate punishment. Chain avalanche. Target: all core assets of the Jinguji Zaibatsu. Disciplinary effect: forced credit rating downgrade, causal level interference with market sentiment. Global short-selling capital will automatically converge, increasing the probability of a capital chain rupture to 100%. Hearing this prompt, I couldn't help but let out a soft chuckle. The financial landmines I had previously planted using intelligence were, at best, physical-level detonations. However, the hyperdimensional punishment handed down by the system was a definitive death sentence for the Jinguji Zaibatsu. Young Master, the market fluctuations have begun. Karen, who had been standing in front of the monitoring console, suddenly straightened up, her voice carrying a rare hint of solemnity and awe. Almost the instant the words left her mouth, the intraday charts representing the 7 listed companies under the Jinguji Zaibatsu on the screen looked as if someone had pressed their self-destruct buttons simultaneously. The first to fall was the Nagashima New District project, which the fifth brother, Rin Jinguji, had forcibly taken over. He thought it was a lucrative prize, unaware that 6 months ago, I had already used the project's underlying assets as collateral to hedge a hidden debt of 50 billion yen against several bloodthirsty Wall Street venture capital firms. The moment the system's punishment was triggered, the quantitative trading bots on Wall Street seemed to receive an irresistible command. Without warning, they leaked the information regarding this 50 billion yen cross-default directly to the Financial Services Agency of Japan. Boom! An unprecedented earthquake rippled through the entire Tokyo financial sector. Mitsui Bank has just unilaterally announced the termination of all credit cooperation with the Jinguji Group and is demanding the early repayment of bridge loans totaling 20 billion yen within a week. Karen's slender fingers flew across the virtual keyboard, gathering shocking pieces of intelligence onto the center of the large screen. Not only that, but affected by the Nagashima project default, the overseas shipping group under the eldest brother, Takeru Jinguji, has just been hit with a joint downgrade by 2 international rating agencies, dropping straight to junk status. The green lines on the screen cascaded down like a waterfall. This wasn't a mere decline. It was a freefall without a shred of support. The once invincible Jinguji Zaibatsu had seen its total market capitalization evaporate by an incredible 300 billion yen in just 15 minutes. It was a total, epic, and fatal collapse. I watched the numbers dive frantically and took a sip of the iced whiskey on the table. The pungent liquid slid down my throat, yet it was not even a 10,000th as bitter as the despair currently filling my brothers' hearts. At the same time, the conference room on the top floor of the Jinguji building had turned into a living hell. Through the hidden surveillance Karen had left behind, I clearly saw the fifth brother, Rin Jinguji, slumped on the expensive carpet, clutching a phone with a shattered screen. Just moments ago, his private bank accounts were fully frozen by the court due to joint and several liability. Not only did he fail to cash out, but he was now burdened with a debt he could never repay in a lifetime. Meanwhile, the eldest brother, Mikoto Jinguji, who had always prided himself on being steady and composed, was now shaking the CFO's shoulders like a madman, roaring something with bloodshot eyes. He had illegally embezzled 10 billion yen in public funds, originally hoping to cover the deficit with profits from overseas shipping. But now, the plummeting credit rating had triggered a frantic run by creditors, and his capital chain had completely snapped. The moment the auditing department stepped in, he would face at least 20 years in prison. As for the other brothers, some were frantically smashing antique vases, while others stared blankly out the window, clearly utterly crushed by this devastating blow that defied all comprehension. They're finished. Karen walked up behind me, her gaze cold as she watched the Chable scions on the surveillance monitors, looking like stray dogs. Young master, thanks to the market panic triggered by the system, the profits from the short positions we placed at the peak are snowballing. The available net assets in our account have now officially surpassed 100 billion yen. Only 100 billion? This is just the beginning. I set down my wine glass, my eyes as cold as ice from the furthest reaches of the north. The punishment given by the system is destruction, but what I want is absolute dominance. Send out the word, prepare to close the net. When their stock price drops to the point where it's worth less than scrap paper, that is when I shall re-enter the Jinguji building in the guise of a savior. The rain outside was like a deluge from the heavens, with gale-force winds whipping icy water against the bulletproof glass of the safe house. Inside, the firewood in the fireplace crackled faintly, and a vinyl record player was pouring out the deep melodies of Bach's cello suites. I leaned back in the velvet armchair, holding a glass of freshly poured red wine. Young master. Karen approached me silently, switching the holographic surveillance feed to the manor's main gate. They have arrived. I lifted my eyes slightly. On the screen, under a few dim, waterproof searchlights, 3 black custom sedans, once symbols of the Jinguji Zaibatsu's supreme power, sat in a disheveled state outside the black wrought iron gates. The car doors swung open, and the first to step out into the torrential rain was the man who once held absolute power over life and death in this empire, my grandfather, the current helmsman of the Jinguji Zaibatsu, Ryanosuke Jinguji. He carried no umbrella. His expensive, custom-made suit was instantly soaked by the downpour, clinging tightly to his aged, hunched frame. Following closely behind him were my 6 insufferable brothers. My eldest brother, Takeru Jinguji, who once clamored to crush me under his boot, now stood with disheveled hair like a drowned rat. My third brother, Tsukasa Jinguji, who was saddled with astronomical debt after his margin call on a betting agreement, had legs so shaky he nearly required support just to stand. And then there was the fifth brother, Rin Jinguji, always the one for snide remarks, now deathly pale and shivering in the gale. Turn on the external speakers, I commanded indifferently. Karen pressed the button on the center console. A second later, her grandfather's aged voice, marked by a violent tremor, echoed through the high-fidelity speakers within the warm study. Open the door. I'm begging you, as your grandfather. The voice that usually commanded authority without even trying was now humbled to the very dust. On the surveillance monitor, Ryanosuke Jinguji dropped the blackwood cane that symbolized his status as head of the family. His knees buckled, and he knelt heavily onto the muddy driveway. Grandfather! Several cries of shock rang out. However, after a brief struggle, led by Mikoto Jinguji, the 6 brothers knelt in a row amidst the torrential rain like a line of falling dominoes. I know I was wrong. I was blinded by greed before. I beg you to come back and take charge. The group has been pushed to a dead end. If there isn't 200 billion yen in margin to fill the gap by tomorrow morning, the entire family will be completely finished. Jinguji Takeru kowtowed frantically toward the surveillance camera, his forehead slamming against the waterlogged stone pavement, leaving streaks of crimson blood mixing with the rainwater. Second brother, I don't want to go to jail. All my overseas assets have been frozen, and the liquidated damages are as high as 50 billion. As long as you're willing to save me, I'll hand over Far East Intelligent Manufacturing to you entirely. I'll be your dog for the rest of my life. Jinguji Tsukasa wailed heart-wrenchingly, stripped of every last bit of his dignity as a chaebol scion. Watching these weeping men on the screen, I felt no ripple of emotion in my heart. They finally understood a cruel reality. It wasn't that the Jinguji chaebol couldn't function without them, but that without me, they couldn't survive for even a single day. In this devastating crash brought down by the system, their meager business talents and self-righteous schemes were nothing short of a joke. System notification detected total mental collapse of the primary antagonists. Host's prestige value has surged significantly. The mechanical voice in my mind sounded exceptionally pleasant at this moment. I swirled my glass, watching the deep red liquid inside refract blurred colors under the lights. Young master, should I open the door? Karen looked at the screen, her eyes devoid of any pity, showing only absolute obedience to me. Open the door? I let out a soft chuckle and drained the red wine in my glass in one gulp. It's raining so hard outside. Since they like kneeling so much, let them stay there and clear their heads. What the Jinguji family owes me cannot be repaid with a few apologies and a handful of tears. This rainy night plea is merely the first step in my reshaping of the entire imperial order. What I want is not just their submission, but to trample their dignity, their power, and even their souls beneath my feet, ensuring they never rise again. Save the surveillance footage and back it up to the cloud. I stood up, not even bothering to spare the screen another glance as I turned toward the bedroom. Tell security that if anyone dares to approach the gate before dawn, they are to fire a warning shot immediately. Tonight's rain is destined to be long. The rain has stopped. The first rays of dawn pierce through the heavy, leaden clouds, mercilessly illuminating the wreckage outside the safe house. After a night of torrential rain, the once lofty head of the Jinguji conglomerate and his 6 young masters now looked like neglected vagrants, caked in mud and shivering as they huddled outside the black ornate iron gates. Young master, it is time. Hualien handed me a steaming cup of black coffee. I took a sip, the bitter, rich liquid awakening my morning senses. Setting the cup down, I casually draped a solid black trench coat over my shoulders and spoke flatly. Open the gates. Let's go see our former family. The heavy iron gates let out a low mechanical rumble as they slowly retreated to either side. Hearing the commotion, Ryanosuk Jinguji, who was kneeling at the very front, struggled to lift his head. This once arrogant old man now had a face as pale as paper, his lips turned purple from the cold. When he saw me walking slowly from the depths of the courtyard, a sudden, sharp glint of survival burst forth in his originally clouded eyes. You're finally willing to come out. Ryanosuk Jinguji's voice was as hoarse as a worn-out bellows. Grandfather knows he was wrong. We were blind before. As long as you nod your head now, the position of the next head of the Jinguji Zaibatsu is yours. I will hand over all the group's core resources to you without reservation. Quick, go fill that 200 billion yen margin deposit at Yamato Bank, otherwise, it will be too late for everything. The brothers behind him also seemed to have caught hold of a final life-saving straw, scrambling and crawling forward one after another. Second brother, save us. As long as you step forward, those short-selling institutions on Wall Street will definitely retreat. Watching this group of people make such a spectacle of themselves, I came to a halt. Looking down at them from my vantage point, a cold, mocking sneer curled at the corners of my mouth. Head of the family? Grandfather, did kneeling in the rain all night cause water to seep into your brain? A dead-ridden, credit-bankrupt mess that is about to be investigated by the Tokyo District Public Prosecutor's Office. Do you really think I'd want that? Jinguji Ryanosuk froze, his eyes widening in disbelief. You... What do you mean? Are you really going to stand by and watch a century of family legacy crumble into ruin? A century of legacy? I let out a cold laugh and signaled to Karen behind me. Karen stepped forward and slapped a thick stack of documents directly into my eldest brother Jinguji Takeru's face. On the scattered papers, the logos of several offshore funds were clearly visible. Why don't you take a closer look at those documents, brother? I said, hands tucked into my trench coat pockets, my voice so calm it was despair-inducing. Over the past 48 hours, the entities that aggressively shorted 7 of the Jinguji Group's listed companies forcibly acquired your overseas mortgage assets at rock-bottom prices, and collaborated with Mitsui Bank to drain your last bit of liquidity. Those were my shell companies. In other words, the foreign enemy you are so desperately trying to fend off is me. As soon as those words were spoken, the air seemed to freeze instantly. Jinguji Mikoto's hands trembled as he picked up the documents from the ground. When he saw that the final creditor signatures were all mine, he looked as if he had been struck by lightning, collapsing abruptly into the muddy water. Impossible! This is absolutely impossible. How could you possibly have such massive capital to leverage the entire Zaibatsu's holdings? Jinguji Mikoto roared hysterically, his eyes bloodshot with despair. Because while you fools were tearing each other apart for those scraps of power, I had already used the system's intelligence network to perform a bottom-layer penetration of all your core assets, packaging those riddled debts and selling them to Wall Street. The current Jinguji Zaibatsu is saddled with a total debt of 3 trillion yen, and I am your sole and largest creditor. I coldly pronounced their death sentence. After hearing all this, Jinguji Ryanosuke let out a desperate gurgle from his throat, spat out a large mouthful of blood, and slumped into a state of utter exhaustion. He finally understood that from the moment I was exiled, this strangulation targeting the entire Zaibatsu had already begun. Now there are only 2 paths laid out before you, Karen added coldly, pulling out several other final agreements. First, go to prison with this 3 trillion yen debt. The combined sentences for each of you would be enough to keep you behind bars for 200 years. Second, sign this unconditional equity transfer and asset divestiture agreement, transferring all movable property, real estate, family trusts, and group shares under your names to the young master for the price of 1 yen. That way, you can at least continue to live as ordinary people. This is robbery. I won't sign even if I die. The 5th brother, Jinguji Rin, suddenly jumped up, pointing at my nose and cursing violently. I didn't even look him in the eye, merely tilting my head slightly. The black-clad bodyguard standing beside me immediately stepped forward and delivered a brutal kick to the back of Rin Jinguji's knee. Accompanied by the crisp sound of bone snapping, he let out a wretched scream and collapsed heavily to his knees once more. I am not negotiating with you. I am issuing a notification. I leaned down, staring into Ryanosuke Jinguji's eyes, which were filled with remorse. Sign it. This is the price you must pay for your arrogance and stupidity. After 10 minutes of deathly silence, Ryanosuke Jinguji reached out a trembling hand and picked up the pen. He knew the tide had turned. In the face of my absolute power, they had no possibility of a comeback. As he took the lead in signing his name, the other 6 brothers could only surrender everything they owned in humiliation, amidst despair and resentment. That afternoon, the sky cleared completely. I stepped back into the CEO's office on the top floor of the Jinguji building. The Jinguji family crest that once hung on the wall had been removed, replaced by the logo of the new conglomerate under my sole ownership. Standing before the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking the bustling concrete jungle beneath my feet, my heart felt an unprecedented sense of calm. Those 7 family members, who were once so arrogant, had just been driven out of this building by security like common beggars, forever cast out to become penniless commoners at the very bottom of this city, carrying a shame that could never be washed away. System notification, ultimate annexation mission complete. The Jinguji Zaibatsu has been thoroughly destroyed and restructured. Judgment. The host has obtained absolute economic dominance over this world. The coronation ceremony of the new empire is officially complete. The cold, mechanical voice in my mind had now transformed into a victory fanfare. Young master, the new board of directors is fully assembled and awaiting your instructions. Karen pushed open the door and stood respectfully behind me, her cool eyes brimming with fervent admiration. Let's go. I turned around and strode toward the double doors that symbolized supreme power. Go tell the world that the old Jinguji Zaibatsu is dead. From this day forward, I will be the one to decide the name of this empire. The end. Thank you for listening. Please feel free to subscribe, like, share, and comment. Thank you.